So what I'm going to do now is we're going to slowly get into the farming aspect of being Afro-Indigenous or darker hue of the Native Nation or Black Indians, and the things that we did down in Essex County that I still do here up here at Evergreen Brickworks and at the University of Toronto Scarborough campus as well. So a lot of the farming techniques, like I said, I still do because they have ran their test of time. I learned it from my grandparents and my great grandparents. Yep, I did have my great grandparents up until I was the age of 14, 16. That's when my great grandparents passed on. So I learned knowledge from them as well. And it still works. It still works to this day. It still works. So one of the first things that we would do, and when we're gardening in our urban gardens, our rural gardens, or as I say, garden where you are, plant something where you are. It's fine to look at the seeds. Look at where your seeds are coming from. We always kept our seeds from the previous harvest, so we always continue, because those seeds, when they're planted in that soil, they're used to that surrounding. They're used to being there. I'm leaning back too much. I gotta move forward for a little bit. There we go. They're used to that surrounding. So we always planted those seeds. So one thing I always remember my grandfather doing was in the wintertime, if he was creating a little small greenhouse in the backyard, he'd always go to all the seeds, open all his seeds. His seeds would be in containers like this, if you can see that, containers like this. So a lot of baby jar containers would be hanging out either in the basement or go to the barn. You see them in his little barn shed. You always see these seed containers. And what he would always do, he would always go to the seed containers, crack them open, let them sit for a minute, and then he'd take his finger and just kind of sprinkle it in the seeds, and he'd whisper some words and go to each and every container and do that. And one day I asked him, well, Grandpa, why do you do that? He said that's his way of talking to the seeds, getting them ready, telling them to get ready for planting, and thanking them for giving up their essence to feed us, to take care of us. And so after that, I'd go around with them and put my fingers in there and say what I could say as a kid, grow well, speedy grow, lots of pumpkins, lots of strawberries, stuff like that, right? But as I got older, I realized that he's really onto something. He's really onto something, because when we as gardeners, as farmers, urban farmers, as rural farmers, as hobby farmers, we all talk to our plants. If you don't, I will say this: you need to talk to your plants. Your plants are alive. They are sentient beings. They are here with a purpose. And then I realized that doing this right here, it's just like pre-talking to them. So it's just like, to me personally, it's like talking to the baby when it's in the mother's womb before it comes out, right? I'm sort of talking, put my hands, talking to these seeds. And at first, I ain't gonna lie to you, at first you feel like, is this kind of, kind of weird? But you realize after a while, no, this is not weird. This is us connecting back to our source. This is us connecting back to sentient beings that are going to sustain us. So who are we not to say thank you and not spend time with them and give them our energy? Because as much as they can give us their energy to us, right? So we're going around. My fingers inside the seeds, all these seeds, and then we go outside. We get on the land, get the land ready. Sometimes we will use a rototiller on the land. Just if it's way too clayey, if I can say clayey as a word, and that's only because when they were digging the foundation of the homes, some of the clay was put into certain spots and stayed there. But a lot of the clay, as you'll see in a PowerPoint coming up, a lot of the clay we would actually use for making clay pots, for clay pot irrigation. Or as my one grandfather on my father's side, he was a clay artist, and he would take this clay and make all these sculptures and flowers and these dogs and cats and people walking with dogs and cats. He did all this beautiful stuff with the clay. We'll get to that in a minute. So we would get outside, and all of our scraps So if we're not feeding all of our scraps or slop, as we call it, to the pigs, giving some of the vegetable slops to the chickens, we'll take that and what we will do when the ground gets soft, nice and soft, we'll start digging in the ground. We'll dig in the ground about 1 foot down and take all the extra compost, all the extra vegetable slop, not crap, vegetable slop, and we'll bury it in the ground and just cover it. Make sure it's 1 foot down. We'll just cover it and leave it. You can do it in the beginning of spring or in the fall time, beginning late fall. What that's going to do is that's now your in-ground compost pile. So when the plants are growing, mind you, everything's down there about a foot. It's starting to break down. It's breaking down. You're putting your seedlings, your plants on top. Everything's starting to grow, right? Growing big. They have the roots going down through the soil. And one day you're going to realize when the roots hit that compost pile, or when the compost pile with water moves up, is when you'll see your plants all starting to shooting up, getting taller, getting bigger, because they reached that perfect food mix they're looking for. I still do that at Brickworks in the beds I do there. We have our compost bins, but I'll show the volunteers to dig a 1 by 1 foot trench and take any excess food waste that we have that goes inside there. And it's got to be down at least 1 foot to 1.5 feet, because if it's any less than that, you're going to call forth rodents. You're going to call forth things you do not want. You won't. Yes and no, you don't want it in your backyard, but you not really want it in your backyard. Okay. So make sure it goes down deep enough, and especially you might get raccoons. So go down deep enough. All right. So we'll do that. We'll plant some sunchoke if we think our soil has too much clay in it. When it comes to plantings for us, we will plant sunchoke. So most people know about the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, how they're this great food together, complete protein. They're great for succotash. They grow well together, companion planting, Sister corn needs a lot of nitrogen. So you plant sister bean, she has nitrogen nodules. She feeds sister corn. Sister corn gives sister bean a trellis to grow around. Then they have sister squash, the warrior squash, who protects the sister bean and sister corn. And because she has thorns on her stems, and great big leaves to keep the soil cool, right? Perfect. Superfoods. Been great even for your health. But for us, when it comes to planting, if we're preparing our soil, if we think that our soil is either too compact, we plant sunroot or sunchoke, or people know them as Jerusalem artichoke, right? Always remember, they're not from Jerusalem. They're not an artichoke. They're from North America. They're part of the sunflower family. They come from here, all right? So when we plant her in the ground, what she does, that she will send out her roots and her nodules, and she'll start forming her tubers, and she'll start breaking up the clay for you. So of course she goes with beans and corn, with beans and squash as well. One thing about sunroot or sunchoke or Jerusalem artichoke, if you're going to eat this food, you must prepare it with some sort of citric acid, lemon, lime, grapefruit if you must, or maybe you're gonna go to the health food store and get the powdered citric acid, but something's gonna have some sort of acid to it. Maybe you wanna put peppers in it, but something that has some sort of citric acid to it, because of as much as the inulin that is great for people who are diabetic, okay, because the inulin helps regulate your sugar, they say. That inulin, because there's so much in it, if you don't add the lemon or the citric acid to it, when you eat it, you're going to get very, very gassy, and probably to the point where you will be in pain. So make sure you put some sort of citric acid in it. Whenever I'm teaching at Brickworks about eating traditional foods, I always tell them, here's the sunchoke. It's great for all these things right here, but here's how you eat it. If you don't eat it properly, you may have very, very bad gas. That's just the reality of it. All right. So remember, some sort of citric acid, or make it into like a coleslaw. Do something like that. If you make it into a coleslaw and you put it into, or a sauerkraut or something like that, and you put it into a jar, let it sit, and all the bubbles you see forming at the top of it, that's the inulin. Just crack the jar open and let those guys escape, and put the lid back on. Good eats, really good food. Mind you, it tastes like soil, does not taste like potato, it tastes like sunchoke. All right. So our next one that if we're planting our soil, if we think our soil is contaminated when it comes to a sisters mix, we will do sunflowers, beans, and squash. Because sunflowers have this ability to help decontaminate your soil. And they look very pretty as well. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, you can eat the sunflower leaves. You can take the roots and dry them out and make sunflower tea if you want to. All right. At Brickworks, we had a salmon around Salmon Day, and we had all the big sunflowers that I grew. What I did was I took the sunflower leaves off, and we're gonna soak them in water, and we put spices and stuff on the salmon and coat all the salmon in sunflower leaves, and we smoked them that way. And people went crazy for the sunflower leaf smoked salmon. Sounds good, doesn't it? So doing all that, sorry, I'll move forward again. My chair wants to fall apart on me here. Getting our soils ready, making sure that we are doing any green crops, so any clovers on our soil, allowing some plants to just grow. So when it comes to weeding and stuff like that, we weed. We always did the pull and drop method, but we'd always pull the plants out and cut the roots off and get rid of the roots, but keep the top parts. That's what we'd always do. Or if your grandfather showed me to take the top parts of all these weeds, put them in what's it called, cheesecloth, put that in water, let that soak, and then you have this nice fertilizer, wet fertilizer for your plants by using weeds, or as I like to say, plants that are behaving badly. They're not weeds, they're just plants behaving badly. They just are in places where you just don't want them to be. And so we either relocate them or reuse them, right? All right, I hope everyone's still with me. Awesome. Okay, so now here's one thing that I had to really learn growing up when it comes to us down in Southwestern Ontario, gardening, farming, doing what we do down there. My grandfather taught me how to basically read nature as to when to plant and how to plant. The scientific community calls it phenology. So looking at Mother Nature and getting the cues from Mother Nature as to when to start your garden. And I think that in this time of climate change, we really have to start looking at Mother Nature as to when to start doing our plantings. We got to really pay attention, because some years it seems like she wants us to start everything early. Some years it seems like she wants us to start everything late. And if we're not paying attention, we will miss out on our proper opportunities. So when it comes to phenology, certain things that my grandfather always told me, all my grandfathers and grandmothers, the greats and the I can't say not greats, they're still great to me. They've always said the same thing. So looking at nature, if you're going to plant potatoes when you notice the dandelions about to bloom. All right, so those dandelions are coming up, they're going to bloom. You see them open up and bloom, plant your potatoes. They would plant when the daffodils bloom. So daffodils bloom, they would plant peas in the ground, start planting their peas. When the lily of the valley starts to bloom, they planted their tomatoes. All right. So when it's time to plant your corn, they look at the oak leaves. If the oak leaves were the size of a squirrel's ears, mind you, you got to get close enough to a squirrel, look at the ears, and then look at the oak leaves. It is time to plant your corn, to seed your corn outside. All right. At that same time, when the oak leaves are the same size as the squirrel's ears, the morel mushrooms, those are ready to be harvested. All right. When the iris is in bloom, it was time we would transplant our eggplants, our melons, our peppers. When lilacs were in bloom, we would plant our beans, our cucumbers, and squash outside. When the lilac leaves were starting to appear, that's when we would put our beets or carrots or lettuces and stuff like that outside. And if you really look at it and look at when these plants would appear in the calendar, you'll realize that some of the plants, like doing crocuses. So when the crocus would appear, where is it? I have everything written down for us today. So when the crocus would appear, it's time to plant. I forget it now. Where are you? I'll find it. But when the crocus appears, it's a full moon, right? So some people are looking at the indigenous ways of planting by the moon, so lunar planting. I'm not too well versed on that, but as I started doing more and more research and looking at doing my plantings, And one day I said, let me look at the moon when it comes to crocus. When I'm doing a crocus planting this, and the crocus is up. Okay, there's a full moon that day. So what I've been doing lately is actually going through all these and looking at, okay, well, the dandelions bloom. Is that a full moon or a quarter moon? Because I really would like to learn more about the lunar planting of things. That's a whole different style of planting, a style of planting that I have no idea about. But as more and more I look at it, the more and more I relate it to what my grandfather taught me about phenology, about looking at Mother Nature as to when to plant, right? So you have all these ideas, right? You have lilacs blooming, so you plant your beans, your cucumbers, your squashes. You can also do, give you guys one last thing when it comes to transplanting. So when irises are bloom, like I said, the transplanted eggplants, melons, and peppers. So when a crocus flower, okay, if you have roses, when a crocus begins to flower, prune your roses. Easy peasy. Prune your roses. If you're looking at your lawn care and stuff like that, so when aspen or chokecherry start to leaf out, if you want to do cool season flowers, wait till the aspen and chokecherry start to leaf out, then start planting your cool season flowers. Because not only do we plant food, we planted flowers as well. Because you need those flowers, those pollinators. So one thing I should say before we move on, when it comes to the three sisters for us, we actually planted a fourth sister in our gardens, which is the black-eyed pea. Not the group, but the actual food you eat. So our black-eyed peas vine add nitrogen to the ground, and those were brought forward from when the enslaved people came north to Canada. They brought certain seeds with them, black-eyed peas. Some members of my family brought a certain tobacco with them when they came north, started planting that all around as well, right? So they brought all these seeds together as well. One thing you should know about the enslaved people who ran north to Canada for freedom, a lot of those were actually Black Indigenous or Afro-Indigenous who ran north. Because in my bloodline, there's actually Shawnee blood as well. And they talk about how we met up with the Shawnees at the beginning of the Ohio Valley, stayed with them for a couple of years. People got married and had kids, and then they ran north to freedom. And that's one thing you need to know when it comes to us with the Underground Railroad. We never called it that. We just basically called it the run. When we got to the Ohio, you just ran to freedom. Run. The Underground Railroad part came later on. So we're talking about going back to gardening right now and phenology. Phenology, looking at Mother Nature, looking at nature herself to know when to plant, can become very useful. And like I said earlier, in this time of climate change. Brief thing about climate change gardening. We have to right now really look at how we garden, how we take care of this earth. That's why in the beginning of the whole title of this thing is Earth Helping. Earth helping is not to take away from earth work. Earth helping is just something that I've always was told by my ancestors, my great grandparents, my parents, as what we are here to do on this earth. Earth working, I'm all for it. I love it because we're all doing some sort of work. But for us, we realize that the earth has already been worked over too much, especially in this area, in this part of the world, that we need to start doing earth helping. We need to start giving back to this earth. That's why I call what I do earth helping. Earth work, still the same thing. It's the same thing to me. I just call it earth helping because we need to, as a people, as a human beings, as Indigenous people, we need to give back to this earth that is given to us so much. So by earth helping meaning doing companion planting, looking at ways to actually take care of this earth as you're gardening, as you're farming, and how you can give back. Do you want to have a garden that's just all yours, or do you want to maybe have a portion of your garden you want to give back to animals? That's a whole other thing I can talk about. How Evergreen Brickworks, I basically have to give my garden back to animals because I have wildlife there all the time, right? Last year for me was learning how to garden with beavers, because beavers came and dropped trees on my garden last year. So I learned how to garden with them. Year before that, rabbits, deers, you name it, it's all there. So climate change and learning how to garden with nature is something we really have to pay attention to. And it's kind of hard in an urban setting because a lot of people, we don't want the raccoons, we don't want this, we don't want that, but we want all the pretty butterflies, but we don't want those sort of bees, but we want all the other kind of bees, right? we as humans, we just have to realize that we just basically got to suck it up and live with everybody else, live with all the other sentient beings, because we are all part of the web of life, and we must remember that we're all part of that web of life. And what you do to one, you will do to the others. Bottom line, that's just the way it works. Look at climate change. Look at the destruction of our natural lands, of our animals, of our insects. I mean, think about the insects now. We're planting all these gardens for pollinators, but we are going through, the insects are dying by the zillions. If you think about it, I know for me, growing up here in Canada, we're up in Southwestern Ontario. Okay, so for me, I'll be 50 in March, right? So I grew up in Southwestern Ontario. Grew up when riding in a car with my parents, and then your windshield being covered with bugs everywhere. Now it's up in the 2000s, and there's not a lot of bugs. I remember being back in high school and reading that the salt from the ice, the salt we use to de-ice our roads with, were killing the amphibians by the zillions. This is back in like early 1990, way back when. They realized by the zillions. And now here we are again, saying the exact same thing in 2022, right? Did we learn anything? I'm beginning to believe that we did not. So that's when it comes to us as urban farmers, as agriculturalists, as horticulturalists, as people who walk with the earth. It's our time to step up and do what we need to do. We need to recognize this, and really recognize this, and not wait another 10 years, 15 years to go, oh, remember this? No, we got to do it now. Because climate change and the destruction of our natural lands is now. It's not in 10 years, not in 15 years, it's now. And we need to step up. So that comes to us as gardeners, right? Picking things that are not going to harm the earth, learning how to garden with the earth. So like I was talking a bit about climate change gardening. When it comes to climate change gardening, we have to start learning how to mix and match our crops now. If you're gonna do corn, and if you're outside or maybe in your container gardens, you have corn, plant your corn, let your corn grow, then plant some lettuces, or plant some plants that need shade. Plant them, intermix them with your corn. So as the corn gets nice and big, it will cast shade on those cool weather crops that need that extra shade, right? Plant some more some sunflowers around your plants to cast shade on some of those plants, because that sun gets hot. That sun's getting seriously hot, right? And sometimes we see now our plants look nice and green. We get those hot summer weeks, right? And all of a sudden our plants get this dull green, where they get dull green and start to die, right? So plant something that's going to give it some sort of shade. At the same time, if you plant a lot of sunflowers around, especially if you're doing in-ground planting, the sunflowers will be the first, not to be rude, the first to go down when it comes to squirrels or anything that eat your crops. The sunflowers go first. Once you get to fill the sunflowers, they work on. But there's other ways to get around that, right? When it comes to rodents or raccoons eating your crops, especially those squirrels, those pesky squirrels that everyone goes, those squirrels, they are not the nicest at all. All right,